right, guys, and welcome back to another episode of the ADHDads. I'm your host, CJ.
And I'm JJ.
And today we got a very special guest on. We got the dad coach, Benkilloy. Ben helps dads create lasting feelings of change and helps them grow through their generational trauma by redefining the definition of living. He helps men navigate their generational trauma and teaches them scream-free parenting techniques, which is one of my favorite books. So I'm really excited to dive into that with you. And he's been working in this space for the last 6 years and is here today to share his experiences and insights. And we're going to help families grow into more intentional and generational success here, talking with Ben. So why don't you introduce yourself, Ben, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here as well. And one thing, the word that I would focus on in what you just read is living. If there was one word that would describe a thesis of my life, it was a misunderstanding of what actually being alive was. And what is the difference between being alive and actually living? Prior to turning 30, I was alive. I did a lot of great things and cool things. I joined the Marine Corps. I traveled to Okinawa. I did and saw a bunch of things over there. Never saw any war from Afghanistan or Iraq. Grew up on a farm. None of that really taught me how to live and gave me permission to live. It was all based on this idea that there was a certain set of rules that I had to live by, and essentially all cascading to when I turned 30. I was a dad of a 2-year-old and asking hard questions like, is what I'm doing here mattering? Or at the end of my life, is anyone going to show up at my funeral and care that I was here? And the hard question was at that point was, I was like, I don't think anyone's going to give a damn that you were here, Ben. Like nothing you're doing is any meaning. And even a more gut-wrenching, if that's not enough for you, I was asking other hard questions and looking in my daughter's eyes, being like, how can I take you into your life if I can't even do it for myself? And essentially going from that pit and digging myself out, finding better dudes around me to help pull me up into places that I wouldn't even imagine where I am today. And now kind of walking through my own hell, making my mess, my message, and now helping other dads redefine that definition of living for themselves.
So what did that journey look like for you? You know, what were the things and the questions that you were asking yourself along that to change that perspective and get there?
The change is honestly almost so simple. It's like, really? There was a question that was handed down to me that if you want something in life you've never had, then you need to start doing things that you've never done. That was the precipice for change. And that was the lens that I got started with. So I dove into that question and I'd be like, what is something you've always wanted but never had? Or that result? And I'm like, I wish I had friends. I never had anybody in my life that I could count on. Pretty much felt like after the Marine Corps, everybody in high school kind of just left me behind. No one was really reaching out. No one cared that I was here. Going back to that, like, I don't think anybody even notices that I'm in this world. And when I realized it was friends, then I started realizing, what am I not doing to have friends? Because other people have friends. It's not like they don't exist. It's just they don't exist in my world. So what am I missing? And then I realized this weird anecdotal part of it, that I don't have friends because I don't talk to people. That when I dove into that, I also then realized that I don't talk to people because every person in my mind was the high school girl that said no. And that rejection really sucked. And so I had to pull it back and realize, like, that's not a good reason not to talk to people at 30. So I was like, okay, I have this formula. I know what I don't have. I potentially know why I don't have it. Am I willing to do something different? And luckily there was a place in our subdivision. There was a park surrounded by where we were living. There was always dads there. But there was a story in my life that was going on that when I was at the park with other dads, I would always be like, I think I want to say hello. I think they might want to say hello. But I would tell myself, you know what? They probably had a long day like I did. And you know what? They just want to be off and just watch their kids play. And eventually, using this formula, I was like, you know what? Screw it. I'm going to say hello. And then it turns out we were both just playing chicken. And so then once I figured that out, that we were both playing chicken and that other people actually want to say hello back, the world's just waiting for someone to say hello first. I learned to start doing that over and over on airplanes, grocery stores. And I learned, like, there's a lot of cool conversations that you can't unhear on the other side of hello. And once I started doing that and joining different mastermind communities like the Dad Edge where we met, I learned that there was different parts of me that I had never even understood were part of me. One of the early things that was reflected back by saying hello, by having friends, is people started saying, Ben, the way you put words together is not like other people. And I'm like, huh, that's really interesting. I've never had that feedback before. I'm not really sure what to do with it. But compound that over time, started blogging, started podcasting, now professional speaker. Learning how to put my words together is an art, but that art can move mountains for people. And understanding that really came from on the other side of hello, but it was a step-by-step of really understanding, like, who did God intend me to be when he created me, realizing that the reflection of people around me could help me see who I am, and then have the courage to step into it, and continuing and repeating that process is essentially how it went from 30 to 38 and still here, but still growing and redefining of what that definition of living actually is.
And I really love to hear that, because what I'm pulling from what you're saying here is the kind of mentorship and the tribe aspect of it. None of us can do this alone, and a lot of men want changes in their life, but don't know the questions to ask, the people to hang around, or where to get the resources from. And I'm always really interested to talk to men like you, life coaches, dad coaches, that want to offer their experience and their knowledge to help other men get to that level, because we go on this path just in this programming of life happens to us and we just react and feel to it. And that's not the case, man. When you get around other like-minded guys like yourself, or in groups like the Dad Edge, where I met you guys, and where JJ got this and I started, it's really been impactful in a way that these conversations continue every day. And there's a mentor, there's a peer, there's someone that we teach through these groups, and all of that combined really helps growth. So I think every man out there needs to find a life coach, someone that they can really bounce these ideas off of and hear another man's walk through a journey of life, and to get that knowledge from. So, I'm glad that you're doing this work. I think that it's important and impactful. So, kudos to you. What were you doing before this? It was a military career before you made this transition?
Military career up to 2007. I adopted the standard military code, which was get a job, go to school, and everything works out, and unicorns show up in the American dream, and there's a big parade, and everything happens for you and perfectly in the way that the American dream is sold. And that all came to a head essentially in 2014 when I turned 30. I dropped out of college, felt like I wasn't doing the right things, doing the wrong things. And I was working as a generator manufacturer in training and tech support and learning how to work with electricity. And essentially all just kind of realizing none of this is really moving the needle in my life, or even lighting me up in a way that I was learning a lot of good skills that I still use today even, but it was not in a place that I felt connected to why I was here, that I was meaningful, or that I was creating relationships. And a lot of that was still going back to hello, because there was opportunity there. It wasn't like it was a wrong opportunity. It just, I didn't have the right mindset and I wasn't in a place to grow. But essentially learning to leave all that behind, and summing up even all what most men, including myself, and it's even part of my keynotes that I give now, is the problem going back to even that definition of living and alive. Most men are only taught how to make a living.
Yeah.
We're actually never taught how to live. And in many cases, we're never given permission to live. Yeah. We are solely passed on with this identity that is, your purpose is to bring home the bacon. And once that is done, your job is done. And that just removes this whole other ecosystem in your soul, your being, your way of life that your family needs, but no one ever told you how to turn on. And in many cases, for kids that grew up with dumpster fire parents, those circuit boards either got fried or they were powered down early in life, and you don't know how to turn them on, or you don't even have consciousness to realize that the reason why you don't hug your kids is because when you went for a hug from your dad, you were yelled at. Or when you were crying, if that was met with anger or frustration, you learned that that part of the operating system should just not be powered on. And a lot of dads I've worked with a few of these where they're almost numb to their kids. They don't know how to hug. They've never hugged their kids, maybe. They don't know why they always lead to anger. It's often just those patterns of what we learned repeated. And that's where trying to break that cycle of whatever generational loop you're on can be broken, but you have to first realize you're on a loop, realize that there is a better way, and you have to want to do that better way.
So what are some of the things that men come to you with? What are the questions that they're asking kind of right off the gate? Or what are some of the problems that you see a lot of men facing when they first come to you?
There's kind of two sides to it. There's one where they find the drug of work and they don't know how to get off of it. It might as well be Adderall, and it helps them function better, and they do well with it, and they perform well. And they're trying to find this other side that is their family. There is connection. There is this feeling of like, how do I not work so much? The other side to that is a dad that feels overwhelmed in his household. That one where he walks to the door and he would rather be at work because every feeling in his body is going off and it feels overwhelming. He feels sad. He feels frustrated, but he also feels numb. And those dads, those ones that had that generational trauma passed on to them, that the operating system is turned off and they're trying to turn it back on, but when they do, they get on shaky. Those are honestly the dads that I run into more, is trying to find those dads. And ultimately, even said a different way, the dads that I often really find myself working to or taken to this place is I like to define this idea of home. When I was doing a military veteran dad podcast, my mission started off with, and I had no idea what I was getting myself into when I started it, but to bring every dad home. That military dads came home physically from war, but we didn't come home emotionally. That we're in the house, in the building, but we're not actually in there. And that idea is often what I was working through in the podcast. And then I realized like all dads struggle to come home. And so then as I went into this and unpacked this idea of home, I realized home isn't a mortgage, which is what most dads consider a home to be. Home is a place that you have on the inside that you can go visit, that feels like a home. It feels loving. And it can't come from the outside. It has to be this building on the inside that you can go calm yourself down, that you can feel loved on your own and feel good. Even said something within my own journey that I've learned, that you relearn that this home feeling is a place where you can go and redefine the real you matters. And it's good. I say that to myself a lot. The real you matters, Ben, and is good. That was a narrative I didn't have rebuilt. It wasn't like torn down, but I didn't have anyone in my life to really help me understand that the real you, Ben, the person you are on the inside, the person who God intended you to be, that's good, and it matters for you to be that person. Oftentimes you learn that the real you, or what your parents might teach you, that the real you isn't good. If you tried crying or you tried expressing yourself, or your dad didn't show up, or different things, all of those can create those stories, and trying to unpack those. But ultimately, the dads that feel like they're in the building of home but don't necessarily feel mentally there, those are the dads that I usually find myself working with the most.
So when you have somebody who, growing up had that fear of rejection kind of hammered into them through that lack of a hug or that empathy from a parent, and then you find yourself in this state of wanting to find friendships and create connections, and you are searching for your calling, all these confidence building exercises, what does that look like to actually make that switch? How do you create in somebody the confidence to make those decisions to create a connection or to try and start a connection, even though the fear of rejection is probably going to be also along with him as he goes into those steps?
As Dave Ramsey says, you really got to be sick and tired of being sick and tired in order to want to make that change. And in the context of these types of stories, there's a phrase that I often say, that you can't just ignore it. You have to do these three things. You have to learn to love the good of your life, all of it, the bad of it, all of it, and the ugly, all of it. That there is no way to get around the ugliness of your life. There's no way to shove it down. There's no way to just put it in a closet and avoid it. You have to learn to love all three. And all three of those are a story. So even an example that I often run into is that there's a story or a moment. Sometimes it could be when a dad's dad actually killed himself and took his life, and say like at 13. There's a moment where life changed. There's a story that happened after that when my dad took his own life. There's questions like, why didn't my dad love me enough to stay? All of these are part of a narrative and a story, limiting your life and what you could do. So the way that I go about rewiring this, or essentially retelling this story, is we need to actually find the good in the ugly. Finding the good in the ugly. Because when you find the good in the ugly, you learn that there's things of you today that you can't imagine living without. But then you realize of why you learned it, and you're like, wow, that really sucked, but I can't imagine living without that skill set. And there's almost this process, or as an exercise, depending on the situation or story, you actually write a letter So if you say at 13, your dad killed himself, writing a letter from you to your 13-year-old self, why it's going to be okay. And when you send that letter back in time mentally, you're ultimately sending it back. You're sending love back to that 13-year-old boy that's worried and scared, that doesn't know what his life's going to be. But ultimately, in this weird universe, it ends up being this one. By sending that love back to that 13-year-old boy, it's like the love then time travels to the present, to where you are. And by loving on that 13-year-old boy, giving him permission to cry, giving him permission to be, it's okay, that loop then begins to heal because it has power in it instead of something that's dead weight. And ultimately, there's an expression that I kind of go through is that a lot of dads think, and this was my case, that I thought these things were holding me back. All of these stories, friends, girlfriends, you name it, was all these things holding me back. But when I did this exercise, I essentially came to this, and it was the most profound thing I've still ever written to myself. Early in life, people pulled me down so that later in life, I could pull people up. That phrase helped me convert my pain to power. And there's another way to phrase this, is that it takes a lot of shit to make good soil. And that fertilizer is what you put on a garden to make it grow better. If you want brighter flowers, you put that fertilizer on the garden. Helping a man understand, identify the fertilizer, those things in life, they're on the surface but need to be worked into the soil. Because if you work it into the soil, your soil is richer. The things that grow from the soil become bigger, brighter, more vibrant. Even a tree from that could provide shade to your kids when they're in need later down the road. But if you don't work that into the soil, it just stinks. But if you work into the soil, the stink goes away. But you have to learn to love the good and the bad and the ugly of it.
You bring up an interesting point because, we had a guest on a couple episodes ago, a family counselor named Vince Horan, and he was talking about, kind of our progression and development throughout life. And there's these things that happen to us that kind of stagnate us or pause us in our progression or emotional evolution as we get older, and we were specifically talking about addiction. A lot of times when an addiction starts is when the person that starts the addiction kind of pauses mentally in their progression of the executive function and analyzing the world. But we're also talking about trauma related with a death of a family member or just parents divorce, moving across country as a little kid, whatever the traumatic experiences are, often can cause that stagnation in our progression. And we tell ourselves those stories a lot, like what you're saying. We come home as men and say, I'm just not good because I have all of these trauma, these bad things that happened in my past, and now I react to it because of that thing, and I just am this person. And I think that that's such a miss, with what we're talking about now here with intentionality. And we talked about core values a few episodes ago and developing that. And, I think right here is anchoring a lot of men when we feel these moments. If we have core values, it can really help us filter and sift through all of the negative stories that we're narrating to ourselves about, I am this person because of this thing, where now you have these core values to say, no, I did that thing, but I'm not this person. This is who I am. These core values are who I am and who I'm trying to be, and this is how I'll get there by using these. So I think, do you have tools like that, or is that kind of an introductory step and grounding men to what is important to them so that they can sift through all of that past bad narrative that they're telling themselves?
One word and it comes from the Scream-Free Parenting lessons and the training that I went through with Hal, is looking at the things through a responsibility filter. So the hard part of traumas is all stories, all feelings are valid. You can tell any story about anything, and telling it momentarily will make you feel better. But it often doesn't actually keep making you feel better. It eventually loses its steam. And you have to be able to move past this idea that I need to express these traumas and move into this point of living. When you look at things through the responsibility filter, it gives me a lens that's a little bit more universal, that's less story tied, because every man can feel like his story is unique. And even someone listening to this podcast, you might be thinking that you've heard an episode and you're like, you know what, that's really good, but my story has X, which in my history is just a cop out for you to explain why you can't dive into your own feelings. That when I often challenge men to tell me stories, I often tell you can't tell me about the people involved. All you can really tell me is what happened, and not even what happened, but how did it make you feel when what happened? Because when you look at through the responsibility lens, your primary responsibility is your response. Your primary responsibility in life is your response. When stimuli come in, what is your response? And your response is often dictated by these predetermined traumas, earlier things. Your brain works a lot like Google. It doesn't come up with new responses. It just Googles, have I been here before? And copies and pastes it in there. And you got about 3 seconds to interrupt that. But understanding your response helps you understand that I can come up with new responses. And even if X happened in the past, it's my next response that matters. And it allows you to almost delete a little bit of that previous response and get crystal clear. What is my next response? Even going a little bit further, that can often mess with us as dads. And even within ADHD kids, you can think that you're responsible for them. And in parenting, that's the number one lie that Hal will tell you, is that parents are told that we are responsible for our kids. But the irony is, if we're responsible for our kids and everything that they do is our fault, but they're free-willed human beings that know exactly how to do different things on their own, but they know how to push our buttons, and we feel responsible for what they did. And the idea is switching it there is that our responsibility is not for our kids. Our responsibility is to them to model the healthiest form of a human being we can. In order to do that, you have to have healthy responses. So understanding that just basic idea of response is how I work every day to get better. That how every time the kids do something different, it doesn't matter whether it was a shit show this morning. It matters what my response was to it. Was I calm? Was I the lowest heartbeat in the room, allowing a sense of calm and peace to come from me that could maybe stabilize the room? Or did I throw gasoline on the fire or the spark and then the whole house burned down with emotions and feelings? Because often when you find that if you can control your responses and find better ways for the next response, even one that everybody can relate to, getting the kids in the bus. This is almost the pressure cooker of parenting. Every single day it rinses and repeats 5 times a week, but also 5 times a week you got a chance to come up with better responses. So every
in my
time
house, it's about the socks, not the bus. It's the socks.
Socks, and just making sure they have socks. I fully emulate, like, you know what, 15-minute check, like before the bus comes, like make sure you got your socks. Make sure you got your socks. Every day there's another chance for a new response. And there's been days where it's melted down. And I remember one where I actually had to walk my daughter up the bus crying. And had I lost my cool, she wouldn't have been able, she would have walked up that bus maybe frustrated at me because I yelled that I made it worse. And then I would have shoulded myself the rest of the day of like, man, I should have did this. I should have did that. I'm a bad father. This is why I'm not a good human being. But I didn't. I was calm, cool, and collective. I walked her through that feeling and I messaged the teacher and she was perfect by the time she got there. But had I done it the opposite, she could have been sad the entire time and disconnected. So realizing that no matter what happens in the past, no matter what happens in the future, the only thing you can control right now in the next few seconds that comes to you is your response. When you get done with this podcast, life's going to keep giving you more moments. I often break it down into that every day life gives us millions of moments. Our primary responsibility is make as many of those moments a little bit better than we found them. Because if we hold on to anything from those moments, we're going to miss the next moment. And if I hold on to something from the morning, I'm not going to be able to receive my kids in a healthy way when they get off the bus, and I'm not going to be ready for those moments. And it's those little moments is how I really try to end dads, that like, it's not about solving all of your trauma and all your life crises. It's about how can you get really good at being ready for the next moment? Because that's the only moment that matters.
Yeah, I really like that. I mean, it's right there in the word for us, right? Responsibility, the
It's
ability to have a good response.
It's never escaped me. Like,
you know, we look at it as like a 4-letter word of like something that is going to come at us that we have to fix, right? And that's not the case. I think you're absolutely right. You know, and that book, Scream Free Parenting, that's one of my favorite messages in there. And, you know, if you're going to take one message from it, I think it's that, is that we're not responsible for our kids, we're responsible to them. and we just miss that so much as parents. We want to fix, we want to, insert our opinion. We want to do it for them. That we think that that's our job. And I think our job is, like you said, to be the lowest heartbeat in the room, to be the lowest temperature of the thermostat, let it play out, and then respond in a way that helps, them autonomize it and work through it, rather than us just trying to get through all of the trauma and negative feelings for them, to get the end of that, because we know we can do it quicker, it's faster, it's easier sometimes. And, if we can just step back from parents and be responsible too, I mean, it's a game changer.
The icing on that cake is when you realize that when you take responsibility for them, you take responsibility from them. And if you take responsibility from them, they won't grow up. And the consequences in life are the best teachers. Why not bank on them to do the teaching instead of you doing the teaching? Because in your life, the consequences of you not doing something have probably been the best teachers. And let the same thing happen for your kids, because we're raising adults, not kids. And so we always want to let those consequences do the teaching, because that allows them to grow up and mature. And the more mature they are, the better responses they have. And it's all tied together. But this gives you a framework to kind of move past some of that trauma, but also dive into the good, the bad, and the ugly of it. Because when life happens, you're going to go into one of those 3 buckets and pull something from it. And do you still want to pull from that bucket? You have a choice. What kind of new response do you want to implant that changes the story?
When someone comes to you, Ben, as I've heard this said, I don't think I've ever said it exactly in these words about my own parenting, but I've heard it said in my parents. I've heard it said from peers when their child is having struggles at school, and the parent just kind of throws their hands up in the air and says, I feel like I'm failing as a parent. When they come to you and say that, how do you get to a reframe?
This one's interesting because I struggle with the exact same thing. My oldest daughter had a really hard 3rd and 4th grade year, and it felt like Groundhog's Day, to be honest. Thank goodness that 5th grade was completely different. I would say it's almost unbelievably how far different it is in 5th grade. But there were times where every day they would come home with something. And she would get off the bus, something happened on the bus. Got to the point where I had to go pick her up from school because the bus was so bad and it wasn't getting any better. There was this thinking that happened with just thinking about what goes on with kids at school, is that life and kids at school can be really difficult and hard. That there are a lot of things at school that are teaching kids that life's hard, that life can be tricky, that people can be tricky, that there are good and bad people in life. It also made me realize, like, why do I spend so much energy making my home be so rigid in a certain way, or that the rules are so important to follow, when school already kind of beats them to death on that? And to kind of flip it, that, what, if they do go in the world like school and they're having a hard time, this place, home, that you radiate from the inside out because you came home yourself emotionally, becomes this calming place that your kids come home to and they feel safe. And that, to me, that goal gives me something I can work to, because I can't control my kids or what they do or don't do when they're at school. All I can control is what they come into at home. Do they feel safe telling me about different things? There is an axiom that really kind of boils down to, and as kids go into teenage years, as I'm getting ready to, so I'll be fully tested on this. But early in my daughter's life, and all 3 of my kids, there was these little things. Like, for example, my son, when the cat died, still to this day, maybe like once every 2 months, he'll get really sad that the cat died. And he'll call me up and say, Dad, I just really miss Oliver. He'll be crying. And it may be nonsensical. It might be 8:30 at night, and I might be ready to just zone out and do Netflix. But every time those moments happen, I'm upstairs, I'm hearing him out. Even there was a movie they watched a couple months ago that a dog died. And he called me up and he was crying. He's like, Dad, we watched a movie today and a dog died. And I was just really sad and I can't go to bed. All he did was express that sadness. And I was like, how do you feel now? He's like, I feel better. And he's like, I think I can go to bed now. It wasn't that they needed me to solve it. They just needed to be seen, heard, and understood with whatever the real feeling was going on. Because here's the crux of it. That moment to an adult doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. But that moment is no different than if you lost your job a day to work to your kids. And so the axiom goes, be there for the little things when they're younger, because they're listening and paying attention to whether you're going to be there for the big things later. And ultimately, you're training yourself for the party that either your daughter doesn't feel safe or your son doesn't feel safe, and you want them to call you to come pick them up. Your response is what they will remember. Going back to your primary responsibilities, your responses. If you respond with a dumpster fire of anger and yelling every time your kids have a troubled moment, they're going to remember dad's response when life happens, because life doesn't stop happening at any point in their life. Do you want to be there when life happens or not? Your response is what's going to dictate that. And early in life, you're building a psychological trust that you were there when it might not have mattered, but you were there. They're going to remember that when they're older. So circling back to your question, when kids have things hard at school, there's nothing you can do because you're not responsible for them getting through it. The only thing you can do is model healthy responses, be there and listen, not add to it, and just help the feeling be seen. Something I often repeat to my kids, especially when there's like a mix of things going on, all feelings are valid. And as a parent, I feel like one of my responses is to help model that all feelings are valid. Share my own stories of different feelings is often a place where I often go to. But realizing and letting them know that all feelings are valid, whether you're sad, angry, or mad at me. Maybe I'm the person that is the person that you're mad at this day, the villain. There's times where I feel like that's part of my role. I have to be the villain because they're angry. And if it's okay for them to be that and express that to me, that doesn't change that they don't love me. It just means they're angry in that moment. So often it goes back to when your kids are having trouble at school and I feel like a bad parent, you have to disconnect because you're not responsible for them. Life will do the teaching. It's really good at that. We all know that personally from different things in our life. And your primary responsibility is to be there with them and to be calm and present. There is a definition that I used actually when I actually went all the way in and had Hal coach me as well. He helped me re-understand what my definition of a friend was. And I've said it so many times I've got it memorized. A good friend is not there that I'm there for you, that I am there with you. And that I can be among the very few people that can be with you, even when you're not okay and have no desire to change you. That I know by me being calm and present, I become a calming presence. And that solidified my most powerful position as a parent, to be calm and present and to be a calming presence so that my kids know that I'm there with them. I'm not there for them, because it was mixed with this definition of a friend that doesn't a friend just jump in and save you or jump in and tell you the truth? No. A friend doesn't try to fix your friends. Your friend tries to be there with you, that walks through hell with you side by side. In some cases, not saying a word, but being that calm, present person that allows them to be calming presence for you.
I have an interesting question then. How do men change this pattern then with dealing with their kids? I feel it could be difficult for a guy to go try to create this psychological safety with their kids if they have past behaviors of not, or maybe interrupting or trying to fix it. And that could lead to an environment where the kid doesn't want to open up these feelings and talk about these things in a way that we can start, showing up repetitively and creating that. So if you have a guy that has kind of a history of not showing up in this way, what are some things that you can teach him to kind of start creating that with his kids and create a pattern there?
Oftentimes for dads that had this almost, let's call it fuse, and let's use electricity, there is almost this gold-like metal that's fusing the circuit closed, that there is no air gap between the response and what they say. That because you can only control yourself, you still can't control your kids, even when you're trying to get better. They're still going to react in many cases the same way. You can't control their responses. You can only control yours. So the primary place that I would start working with the dad is the air gap between life happens and your response. This is where meditation comes in. This is where mindfulness comes in. This is where disconnecting from your thoughts comes in. But there's an exercise that I learned from the author Michael Singer. And I'm going to pick JJ as the person to ask these questions to. JJ, are you in there?
Yes.
How do you know you're in there?
My thoughts never stop.
What's it like in there?
Loud and happy and sometimes confused.
So realizing what you just said there, you're in there, which means that you are a conscious thought in there. I asked you, how do you know you're in there? And you're like, I can hear it, I can see my thoughts. And then you also said that it's happy, a little bit confusing, but you were able to say what's it like in there. For that dad that doesn't have the air gap, when you ask them those questions, one, most of them don't realize that I don't know if I'm in here or not. They just think as their mind, body, and soul is all this one physical being, but it's not. Your mind is your mind, your heart is your heart, and your consciousness is your consciousness. And when you realize what's it like in there, it often feels like you're living in a cramped closet. And if you don't realize that you're in a cramped closet, you don't realize that everything you try to control in the outside world is a result to try to make it okay in there. That oftentimes if you ask what's it like in there and they say it's not okay, I'm not okay, or I'm overwhelmed, their attempts to try to control the outside world is trying to make it okay. But you can't play God. You can't play God with the universe. And you actually have no ability to control the outside physical world. All you can control is you. This is why that air gap is so important. Because oftentimes when there isn't that air gap, I often use a movie theater analogy that it's like we're supposed to go into a movie theater, watch on the screen our life unfold, walk out every night and be okay with it and not hold on to those moments that came into it. But it's often like we're an actor on the screen, that we're in the movie. We are that in the scary movie where the person runs upstairs when there's someone chasing with a knife. Everybody in the movie theater knows, don't do it, you're going to die. But the person in the instincts living in that moment doesn't know that. That just feels natural. There is no thought process in there. The thoughts are out the window, but you want that air gap. You want to get to a point where you can watch your life unfold in a movie theater on the screen and not feel attachment to it. Now, that's easier said than done, but that's essentially the goal that anything in Eastern philosophy will tell you to get through. To get to the enlightened point is where you have that air gap between your responses, that you are not your thoughts, you are not your feelings, you are still in there despite the thoughts that you have. And often the thoughts that you have aren't even reality. They're just your mind that's based on 10,000-year-old programming trying to survive. And in many ways, especially for the parents that had, or the kids that, the adult parents that had issues with their parents growing up, it's like they're trying to leave the cave for the first time. Well, your mind's going to project lions and tigers and bears out there. But the reality is they're not there. So you then have to find courage to leave the cave, go see what's out in the world, and leave this place that's felt safe. Because as a kid, if you think of a 13-year-old kid, those kids are wired to feel safe. And your brain will do anything to survive, even if it's turning off everything, because they want to survive. So your brain's wired for that. And to leave the cave means you're going to power things up. Some things may fry. You might have to get a new upgrade on a Windows operating system. You might be running on 3.1. But like Windows 11 is better than 3.1 by thousands of fold. But you have to be willing to leave the cave and leave the world of XP behind, even back in the day when people were trying to go into 7 and trying to hold on to XP. XP was okay, but Windows 7, Windows 10, they were all much better than XP. But you got to be willing to leave the cave. And that requires you to have that air gap in between there. There's a thought that I often think about. So I asked someone that, like, next to the Bible, why is leadership like this thing that's been studied just as much as the Bible almost for millennia, but yet there is such a gap in leadership? Everywhere you look, you feel like there is just a lack of leadership skills, even though in every major city in the United States, there's a library with thousands of leadership books. But yet there are still people that you could say something about leadership and you might as well be Jesus or Moses parting the Red Sea, even though right next to the Bible it's been talked about. What's the difference? Why is leadership so mysterious? And I asked one of my friends this randomly as I was going trout fishing with him for the first time. And he's like, oh, simple, one word, courage. Leadership takes courage to leave the cave. And most people don't have it. And this is what we're called to as dads, is to lead life with courage, to get busy living or get busy dying. But to get busy living, you've got to leave the cave. You've got to leave these stories behind. You've got to realize that these are jet fuel, that these aren't dead weight, that these are things that can propel you, that they made you who you are. There's going to be a day where your kids might need a life lesson from what you've learned that was really hard. And if you avoid them, you're never going to be able to pass them on. And this idea is really what my message has been about. How do you get busy living into that place where you have courage to lead, even if you're the only person there? That courage is what is the distinction between someone that takes over the world and someone who doesn't, is they just had the courage to do it. And others decided to stay in the cave.
You said a really important thing at the beginning of that I want to go back and touch on for myself and the listeners. And it was, that the work that you do, 90% of it is the before the shit hits the fan, right? Before we're in the trauma moment and feelings are going up and everything's getting wild, that's not the moment that you focus on when it comes to showing up and being present and inquisitive. And I think that that's the miss that a lot of human beings take is, I want the fix. I just give me the tool, the tip, the trick, Ben, to do when I feel bad and I'm about to yell at my kids, just give me the tool that I can remember right then. And that's the miss, man. It's the 90% of the work is the creating the space before the moment happens. What are you doing in the morning with meditation, with intentionality, with planning out your day, with mapping out what you're going to do, how you're going to respond when things go wrong? And that's where the bulk of the work is. It's a daily thing that you need to practice. And then when the shit goes bad, you're not looking and scrambling for the thing because you've been exercising it, you've been practicing it, you've been moving with it, and it's there. It's a part of you. It's a programming. It's the ability to respond. If you don't practice the ability beforehand, then you're just going to react, So I really liked that piece. I've been trying to articulate that on the last handful of episodes here that, this work is daily intentionality.
And even there, if you were to ask me, Ben, what is that thing? I've already kind of said it, but I'll say succinctly on the other side of some of the things I've already said. Every day, the universe gives you millions of moments. Your primary responsibility is try to make them a little bit better than you found them. Whether that's picking up a piece of trash in the sidewalk that you found or being there with your daughter melting down. That moment needs you to be a little bit better, and you can calm down and grow up through that. There's a couple of things of even thinking of responsibility that you talked about. Is we are not responsible for our kids, but we are responsible for creating an environment where happiness can exist. We are not even responsible for making our kids happy. We can bring joy into their life. We can help facilitate things and go do and have fun. You're not responsible for your wife's happiness, your kids' happiness, but you are responsible for creating an environment where happiness can exist. And if you're the CO2 in the household, there's no chance in that. If you have a son, you are the oxygen to his furnace that will fuel his future. And how much does he know about himself to go into it? You are the O2 to your daughter's heart that will understand the kind of woman that she can grow out into the world and the kind of man that she's going to attract back by becoming this full, vibrant person. And in many cases, you are the O2, not the CO2. But if you're the CO2, you are literally starving life and happiness from the people around you. There's another question I often like to ask when people are like diving into why is this work important? Is who did your family become because you learned how to invite more into your life? Who did your wife become because you created a more abundant life? We often don't see it, but we are the lid to our family. If we learn to raise the lid, then our family can grow with us. One of the worst questions, I hope I never get asked it, but I saw it on Instagram reel, is we often tell our kids they can be anything they want in their life. But the reel repeats back that they could ask you one day, Dad, if I can have everything I want in life, why didn't you? That question, man, that could be tied to every area of your life. And that's why it's so important to keep raising the bar. Like this work doesn't ever stop, but you don't ever arrive. If anything, the mind gets really good at throwing different stories at you to try to reframe the same BS in new ways and make you buy it. And you're like, oh man, I just got rid of that last week and now I just got new lipstick. All of this continues, but your ability to be at peace with it is almost that piece that you want to come back to. And even in that same Michael Singer book, there's a part where he asks you, have you ever had a bad day because Saturn has rings? And everybody's like, no, why would I care that Saturn has rings? All right, well, if you don't care that Saturn has rings, it's the same set of physics that gave Saturn rings as the moments in front of you. So you can't argue about one and not the other because it is literally just a set of physics unfolding in front of you. And this is where you deepen into this idea of surrendering to the universe and just get really good at controlling your response to the universe, because at the end of the day, that's the only thing you can control.
JJ's got some. You're muted, JJ. I don't hear you. You good, or you need us to pause? Because I was gonna go on a tangent, brother. I got a whole story for you. All right. Well, JJ figures out a sound. I'll tell you the parable of the radish farmer. I love the story. I've heard it a few times, but it kind of goes congruent with what we're talking about now. And anyways, there's this dad and son. They own this radish farm, right? And they're producing radishes, and they sell it to this factory. And this factory takes 70% of their profit. So they're only making 30% as radish farmers. And the son goes to the dad and says, Dad, we're only making 30%. I feel like we could be doing better. This feels bad. What is this? And the dad says, I don't know what it is. It's not good. It's not bad. It just is. Well, the next day, one of their horses that they use for the radish farming, he breaks out of the pen, right? And all the horses go free. The kid comes to the son or to the father and says, Dad, this is bad. All of our horses are gone. We can't farm radishes anymore. And the dad says, I don't know if this is good or bad. It just is. The next day, that horse comes back and he's got 25 wild stallions behind him. And the son is just out there, happened to be doing some work on the land, and he closes the pen, and now they got 25 wild stallions. He goes to his dad and he says, Dad, this is great. We're out of the radish farming business. We're horse breeders now. We're going to make a killing. This is great. And the dad says, I don't know if this is good or bad, son. It just is, Well, the next day, the kid is out there. He's trying to train these wild stallions. He doesn't have any experience breaking in horses. He falls off one of these wild stallions and breaks his back. So the next day, the townspeople come to the farm and they say, oh my God, we heard about your son. He fell off the horse and broke his back. That's horrible. And the farmer says, I don't really know what it is. It's not good. It's not bad. So the next day he sees all these, shimmering swords over on the horizon. 5,000 samurais are going to war, and they stop by this farm and they say, you need to send us all your able-bodied men. Your son's coming with us. He's got to go fight this war. And the dad says, I can't, he just got hurt. He can't go fight. The next day, all 5,000 of those samurais die. And the point of that story was we tell ourselves these stories, these things happen to us, and we put so much clout and meaning and definition of our lives and who we are to it. And, sometimes life just is the story, man, and you should just be sitting there as the audience member in your head watching it and be able to detach yourself from the emotional thing, because sometimes the negative thing that is traumatizing and fucked up your life could also be the gateway to something better, something more, and growth that we were never able to see.
I love that. And I've heard that story. When you first said the radish farmer, I didn't remember, but I remember, I don't know if this is good or bad, like that. And even to put a cherry on it, the meaning in what the moment is happening in front of you is the prison that we live in every day. Like the prisons of our life come from the meaning we derive from the moments that happen. And if we hold on to that moment, that's how we stay in prison. But if we just realize it's a moment, it should come in and leave you every moment, because you're going to get ready for a few moments in the future here. Like that is what it is. Almost in this, it sounds like you're a pacifist, but I've actually had this new mindset that one of the most dangerous men in the universe is an is what it is kind of man, because they just accept the punches as they come, and it is what it is. And I'll get ready for the next one, and I'll learn for the next one. But like that is what it is one that's knows that it's a moment. It's going to come and go, and it's temporary, and this too shall pass.
One thing that I wanted to bring up with our podcast being ADHDads is, I love the unpredictability that my son presents me on a daily basis. And having talked about generational trauma and how that plays a part in our tendency to look with fear into the future, which I've heard fear is a pessimistic act of faith of the future. Sometimes I tend to try and predict certain things that are going to take place with my son. And that's a dangerous place for me to be, because he many a times will throw everything on its head. And one of my best examples that I can provide in this conversation is, we had talked about something he was looking forward to at the end of his week at school or after school. And I said, well, let's see how things go for the week, and then we'll have that conversation at the end of the week. I'm going to pick him up after school, and his aftercare teacher tells me, yeah, we had an incident at school. This took place, and everything seems to be fine now. And he told me that he didn't want me to tell you about it. So then on the way home, I said, hey, buddy, your teacher told me about what took place. And he just goes, oh, I told her not to tell you, because he was looking forward to this thing we talked about. But then we had the opportunity to have that conversation. I had little prep time, and knowing all the things that I experienced growing up and the shame that I had dealt with through those experiences, through, my parents kind of having their own feedback, I just opened up the floor to him. I said, well, here's an opportunity for you to just tell me your side of things and what you think about it. And he made some mistakes and he owned up to them. And then he shared that with me. And I was like, oh my God, the week went that much better because you had the opportunity to make a mistake and reflect on that. That is not how I envisioned this would go, and it was all the better for it. So the is what it is sometimes for me with a kid who's going to constantly throw curveballs is the ultimate way to learn to be a better father.
And you would have robbed him of the moment to learn, to be able to seek the truth and talk about hard emotions. Because, in this case, it was a simple care with aftercare. It could be something bigger. He's going to remember Dad's response. Like, he was very calmly, he was listening, and we got through it. And I even tell my son this multiple times, that no matter what you have going on, if you bring it to us, we can get through anything together. But if you don't, then we can't. And just solidifying that you can bring anything to me, and nothing will make me love you less than I do right now. So just if you bring it, we can solve it and make it better. And that muscle in itself. And I love that story. That's a great one.
Perfection isn't attainable. And along the way, as soon as we attain something that we've defined previously as being perfection, once we attain it, we realize the work is still continuing.
Even half billionaires will still say they still need about 20% before they can feel comfortable. Like, it never stops. All the way from like 100,000 to $500 million. They will say, you know what, if I had 20% more, I would be okay. Like, it never actually arrives, which is the prison, again, of our processes.
Well, Ben, this has been really good stuff, man. I've taken a lot away from today. I hope our listeners have as well. As we're wrapping things up here, is there anything that you've got going on in the Dad Coach Benkilloy world that you'd like to talk about, or anything on the website that you've got coming up that you're gearing up for?
Nothing other than if dads are willing to invite an idea or a conversation of what I call a design your legacy, because often it's our legacy that we're not even thinking about. That's that piece that can change everything, becomes that North Star that allows you to make better decisions. Those are the things I offer on my website at benkilloydadcoach. And one of my favorite pieces of advice, I started with it in the very beginning, but I truly want you to realize that hello is the most powerful word you'll ever learn. On the other side of it is a conversation that could change your life, either through podcasting or real life. And if you want more opportunity in your life to change it, on hello, or on the other side of hello, is how you do it. And it's directly proportional. You say more hellos, you have more opportunity in your life show up.
Yeah, we need those hellos, man, because this, it takes a village to raise a kid, as they say. And
I joke on that. That's so often, I can't tell you how many times like that axiom is used, but I just like, it takes a village. You're not supposed to have it figured out on your own.
I mean, we're lucky, we are in the Dad Edge. For the listeners who don't know what that is, the Dad Edge Alliance is a collective, a men's group for dads. We get on weekly calls. We talk about dad stuff, marriage stuff, finance stuff, leader stuff, what you can do. JJ leads a co-parenting call on there. That's how we met. That's how Ben and I met. Ben is a leader within that organization, and Larry Hagner is the owner of that company and does a great podcast, The Dad Edge, and that's how we all three met. That's how we formed a tribe, and a lot of the guests that come on the show, we met through that group. They're my mentors, our peers, our clients. It's a good group, and going back to where we started this podcast. Ben was looking for that tribe. I was looking for that tribe. JJ was looking for that tribe, because we're lost as men and fathers if we're not told and taught these tools. So it's really important that I think that we surround ourselves with men like Ben and JJ and guys that are in these dad groups and looking to really create an intentional legacy for their family. So, Ben, you're doing really good work, brother. I'm proud of everything that you've been putting together and where you're taking things, and can't thank you enough for coming on the show, bud.
Thank you.
All right, guys. Well, until next time, thanks for tuning in. Make sure to like, comment, share, subscribe, support. We love interacting with you guys and hearing from you, so please don't be shy. Let's form a tribe here. But I'm your host, CJ.
I'm JJ, and hello, Ben.
And this has been Benkilloy, the Dad Coach. Thanks, guys. This is the ADHDads. We'll see you next time.